relative to the year before, and what we see this year is close to 1.2 trillion. Is not as large, I mean, compared to what we've had last year. But on the whole, again, it's about where you spend the money on, and if you're going to spend on infrastructure is expensive. In general, to develop proper infrastructure that meets our aspirations towards being a middle-income country by 2030. It's obviously the right thing, but I think the apportionment of cash across sectors is important. But I think Kenyans should also appreciate that the amount of money that is spent is not necessarily what it. I mean, rather that if we spend 2 shillings on a project and 3 shillings on another, doesn't necessarily mean that the 3 shillings is better. Sometimes you can actually achieve more for less in certain places because it's a question of efficiency. So efficiencies as well is one of the ways to assess the budget as opposed to just the overall global figure.
From the estimates, probably, I don't know if you've got
No,
them.
I haven't looked at them, sorry.
Okay. But probably he's giving, bulk of it is going towards infrastructure, then secondly it goes into
education.
Yeah, governance, about 22.5%. But basically, given what areas probably would you feel that he needs to really concentrate on and spread money around?
Okay. Well, infrastructure, there's no doubt about that. I think last year's as well, though we hope that absorption and the ability to actually roll out the infrastructure projects is much better than it was before. Education is a standing one, partly because you know that we have a record number of children in primary schools, in secondary schools as well. So obviously providing for the payment of their tuition for the part that is supported by government, in addition to the fact that there's hiring of more teachers as well is required. The implementation of the constitution, as Wolfgang already said, is yes, it's significant, and I think it's something that is also constrained by time, but it's not big in relation to the whole budget itself, though it's a significant one. You're talking about governance. I think that has to do as well with the elections. Elections are coming in a year or so, slightly more perhaps. But that too also has to be funded, and you need to provide money for the institutions, the commissions to actually, one, conduct the registration, and two, to conduct the elections itself as well. So some money will move that, but that tends to be a one-time shift. I think the more sustained ones have to be in infrastructure, in education as well, of course, and in health.
Maybe let me build on 2 points that Kwame mentioned. Just one is indeed that the leap is not as big as it looks like, right? If you had like trillion shilling budget last year, now you have $1.15 trillion, but you have also a 10% inflation now, so that means $1.10 trillion would be the same, and so you have that little extra. So that's not, in that sense, not as dramatic as it sounds. The other point, again, I also want to build on what he said on that it's not just the amount of money, but how you spend it. So the port of Mombasa is the best example. The port does not necessarily need more money. It needs some more money, but it needs just much better management. It just takes too much time to get the containers through the port, even though the port is not that big in an international standard. Singapore has 50 times bigger than Mombasa, and they get the containers through much quicker. And so that has a lot to do with the management of the port, and that is not only to do with money.